Architecture is facing some of its biggest challenges yet, from climate change to the AI revolution. Join us as we explore how Tom Lewith is navigating these turbulent times and transforming his practice for a more sustainable future in this episode of Architecture Business Club, the weekly podcast for solo and small firm architecture practice owners just like you who want to build a profitable, future-proof architecture business that fits around their life. I'm the host, John Clayton, and if you want a business in architecture that gives you more freedom, flexibility and fulfillment, then go to architecturebusinessclub.com/blueprint and download the Architecture Business Blueprint. It's the step-by-step formula to freedom for architects, architectural technologists and architectural designers, and it's absolutely free as a gift from me. Now let's dig into the conversation. Tom Lewith is a chartered architect and co-founder of NewWorks. Prior to NewWorks, he co-founded and ran TDO, a leading all-services architecture studio. The success of the practice and its work led to Tom being named in the Architects Journal 40 Under 40 and the studio featuring in the Architecture Foundation's New Architects Free. Big issues affecting the industry like climate change, mental health, AI, and the Building Safety Act demand fundamental change. So in 2024, Tom co-founded NewWorks to explore a new way of working based on the principles of specialism, collaboration, wellbeing and sustainability. To connect with Tom, head over to LinkedIn and I will drop a link to his LinkedIn profile in the podcast show notes. Tom, welcome to Architecture Business Club.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Awesome. It's great to have you here. Tom, I know that when you're not busy at work, that you love to be by the seaside and being in the sea, paddleboarding as well. Tell me a little bit about that, what you get out of it.
I just think I find any large body of water very relaxing. River, lake, sea, I don't know what it is, maybe the space, the sense of the vastness of it all kind of makes everything feel a bit calmer. So I like to get in the sea. Yeah, I do like to swim around the sea, a bit of paddleboarding's good for me, I think.
Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun. We're about 45 minutes drive from the coast, but we are really close to a river. And my go-to is kayaking. So I like to go down and go kayaking. And I think any time that I'm feeling a bit stressed out or needing some space, time to think things through, it's just such a good place to go. You know, it's very peaceful out on the water.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. Yeah.
Cool. Well, we're going to talk about big changes that you've recently made in your practice, which, I mean, ultimately it led to the closure of TDO and the launch of NewWorks. So we're going to dig into that today. But before we get onto that, I'd like you to tell me the story of how you got into architecture.
I think when I was younger as a child, I remember always just being really into making stuff, like building things, whatever it might be, dens or models, all sorts of different things. And I think that stayed with me. And the idea of problem solving through making things has always been a fascination. So that really, I think, sort of steered me towards a career in architecture in the end. But there's different influences along the way that meant that was ended up being the destination. But that sense of creativity and making things was, I think, the for me.
Cool. Were you a keen Lego builder by any chance in your childhood?
I think I probably was. I've got this enormous box of Lego at my mum's house, which must have something to do with that. So Lego, pretty magical stuff. Yeah, that would have been featuring highly, I'd say.
Yeah, I'm still a Lego nerd now, to be fair. But
oh, really?
Yeah, that's another story. Every time I buy a set to do, it's just another way to kind of relax outside of work. But my son always kind of gets in there and he wants to do it with me, which is nice. It's nice for a bit of father-son bonding time. But, sometimes I like to do the sets on my own. So I have to just make sure he's not around. Tom, how about telling me a little bit? Could you briefly tell me about your previous practice, TDO? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so TDO was a practice I set up with two business partners back in 2010. And we all three of us went to college together, went to the Bartlett, and so we knew each other from our time there. We're in the same unit for a good chunk of it. And we just had lots of shared ideas that we kept talking about in the pub and when we met up. And in the end, we decided we should probably be working together. So we set up our practice, and it's a kind of condensed version of that story. But that's how we started. And we're starting to explore some very similar ideas. We even taught in the same place, and we had very sort of similar thoughts about architecture. So we built the Forest Pond House as our first building, which we actually built ourselves. And a very small little pavilion on the edge of a pond, and it was a really, really positive experience for us. I think we really understood about each other and what our shared design ambitions were and what that meant architecturally, and that was our kind of course that sort of was charted from there. Really, the fact it was such a small building, we could build it ourselves, and we were able to explore these concepts of self-finished materials and simple forms. And define an architectural language meant that we were able to advocate for that with our clients as we started to and point at it. And as we started to build our portfolio, we were able to explore that more and more. So our buildings really kind of shared a language, which they still do with NewWorks. And in doing that, we were an all services practice. So you'd approach the client, we pick up the project at zero, see it all the way through to stage 7 handover, which is, a very kind of normal way to run an architecture practice. And that's what we did for 14 years. Built a lot of buildings we're extremely proud of. And as you mentioned at the outset, picked up some good recognition for them along the way. And it was a fantastic phase of our careers. I think, we remain extremely proud of TDO. It was a really good experience for us. Hard work, really hard work, but good, yeah.
You had some big successes, though, with TDO, which is fantastic. But things did change, didn't they? TDO, you took the decision to wind things down. TDO went into liquidation. I'm interested to know what factors to your decision to close TDO.
Well, it's... I guess it was kind of conversations that Doug and I, Doug's my business partner, been having for probably 10 years, about once we'd built a few buildings, we'd been through the cycle a few times, we were starting to learn a bit about what it meant to run an architecture practice. So beyond the job of being an architect and actually kind of into the space of running a business, the business of being an architect. And there were a lot of things about the way the profession operates that we felt were sort of suboptimal. And that were repeated frustrations that we found on each project. And I think that's something which I certainly in the last sort of couple of months since we've made this change, we've noticed is shared by a lot of architects. And there are frustrations that everyone's feeling. So those frustrations were really kind of built up over time to a point where we made that decision. And those frustrations are various different things. A big part of it for us is the mental health challenges that come with running a small practice, and the wellbeing compromises that often involves. And that for us had to do with the fact that we were stretching ourselves over significant different set of skill sets with one mind, essentially. So going from our initial concepts through planning, to presenting a building, arguing for the design of it, through building control, detailed tender information on site, disputes with contractors, finishing, handover, post-occupation, pitching for the next job. That's one job, apparently, but it felt like actually we're sort of each of us doing that one job was like doing 7 or 8 jobs. And that, is hard. It's really hard. I think in any walk of life, if your work life pulls you over that spectrum of outputs, it's exhilarating because it's always different, but it's also just absolutely exhausting and really hard. And the reality of running an architecture business is that it also comes with a lot of liability and stress and low pay and low fees. And so the difficulty of carrying out that work alongside the challenge of making that into a viable, profitable business is just so hard. And I think that wasn't unique to TDO. And I think most of the people we've spoken to about it would agree that's exactly their experience. I think what made the difference for us is that in that last sort of 12 to 18 months, we had a lot of projects drifting or cancelling or not starting. And the cash flow situation for us, because an all services business requires an awful lot of infrastructure and overheads at the project scales we're operating at. So, it doesn't take much, and a few projects get cancelled, and you start to operate at or slightly below break even, and it all starts to feel a little bit more risky than it used to. So that was occurring at the same time. And, kind of side of other external factors like I think the climate crisis, especially a few of our clients who are really taking it as seriously as we need to. And for us to engage on the same level as them, I think we need to be making the space to do that, like actually mental space to actually properly engage and work differently, change the way we work to properly address it. There's a culture change that's demanded from the BSA as well in the Hackett report, which I think we all need to be thinking about how we operate. It's an absolute imperative that we change how we operate positively to respond to it. And, AI, I think, is a big threat as well to how we operate. We need to be mindful of that and embracing this incredible change that's barreling towards us and understanding how we might operate in that space. So there's all these factors occurring at the same time, along with the kind of more sort of commercial reality of projects drifting to being like, well, maybe we should actually enact these things we've been talking about for 10 years and now might be our time. So that was our inflection moment, really. That's what brought us to that decision.
So there's quite a lot going on there that led to that decision, which I imagine wasn't an easy one to make. How did you feel about the demise of TDO at the time?
I mean, there's some grief involved in that process, like acknowledging that this enterprise that we put 14 years into is something we're drawing a curtain on. There was some relief as well. I think the reason we did it, rather than just continuing, NewWorks is a completely different business model with significantly lower overheads. So we're able to operate in a way that means the business is more viable on the same fee structure. So from a client's perspective, nothing really has to change in that sense. But from our perspective, we're operating it in a way that it is more sustainable. So I think there's some relief in being able to let go of something that was just an enormous source of stress and difficulty in its operation. But yeah, I mean, it's 14 years of our careers that we put into it to build it to where it got to. So it was a lot of mixed emotions.
I can imagine, yeah. But I think that sometimes we try things for longer than we should, but when we can look at it as a failure or we can look at it as something that we've learned.
Yeah.
We learn from those things. And I love that you've taken that experience and you've put it into something new, something positive, and you've already demonstrating that the changes that you're making are working at NewWorks. I know just from speaking to yourself and your co-founder, Doug, that there's all sorts of benefits that you're experiencing, which we'll dig into a bit more in a little bit. So you mentioned some of the challenges there, some of the things that contributed to the decision to close TDO. So it would be interesting to swing back around to that and talk a little bit about what do you see as the biggest challenges facing the industry today?
I mean, I'd say the biggest challenge facing industry is the culture change that needs to occur. It's demanded from several different perspectives, and it's been demanded for decades. If you go back to Egan report, Latham report, Farmer report, they've all asked for culture change, and I'm not sure we've had it at any point. The BSA is equally demanding of culture change. The climate crisis fundamentally requires culture change in how we operate. So none of these things are new, or the demands for change aren't new, but the need to embrace it is kind of growing. And I think it's something which, that's the challenge I think facing. How do we change? Because if you look at other industries, I think it's kind of widely accepted that the construction industry is generally fairly archaic and backward. Like it hasn't really changed in the last sort of 100 years, whereas most other industries have, and they're much more dynamic and fast moving. So that I think is the challenge is change, and I don't see. But for a profession that's constantly trying to convince clients that change is good, and we need to be building things more, innovatively and more with greater design input, outcomes, and so on. It's surprisingly reluctant to change itself. So I think there's there's an imperative to change how we operate, and we are doing it in the way that we think is the right outcome in that sense. Like, this is the right change that we think is needed. But I think it might not be the right one. It might not be it certainly isn't the only one. Any way we can change. But I think we do, as an industry, need to embrace change to address the climate crisis, address BSA, to properly address AI, rather than becoming kind of more and more entrenched in the old ways of doing things. And I think the old ways of doing things have been the way that everyone does things, but partly because we all get paid so badly. Fees are so terrible that you kind of rely on habits and muscle memory and projects to get through them in a way that you don't lose money. But that's not going to continue to work in the face of these kind of major challenges. So I don't think it is. So change is imperative, and I think change is the culture. The culture change is the big challenge, and I think the thinking about ways to facilitate more sustainable fee income as an architecture business is the kind of key to that solution. And that's one of the reasons why we think NewWorks our structure is one that can work with that, because we're focusing much more on what we're good at, and we can charge properly for that, and then we'll bring people in around us who are really good at their parts as well. And I think that is the kind of, for us, that's the key to how we can all operate in a much more sustainable and financially sustainable way.
That's interesting. That leads nicely on to the next question that I was going to ask. You've mentioned a few of some of those big challenges facing the industry. You've mentioned about climate change and about a mental health crisis in architecture, which is being discussed a lot, and the advent of AI, the changes with the Building Safety Act. So there's all sorts of things going on there. I'd like to hear your thoughts on how small practice owners can attempt to overcome these challenges. You mentioned something there which was interesting about ensuring that the business is financially sustainable.
Yeah.
So that your financial health of the business is in a better position.
Yeah.
So how do you feel that will allow practices to better deal with these industry challenges?
Yes, good question. So I think the answer is probably fairly nuanced in the sense that as architects, we're all slightly different, and we've got different business models and different client bases, and we're trying to see different projects. So I think our response relates to our kind of project type and sector and client base. So I think our feeling is that the solution or the need for change in the way that we're advocating for it exists outside of the sort of smallest and largest practices. I think that if you're a very large practice, you're in a position to resolve things appropriately with different teams according to the project and so on. If you're a much smaller practice and you're working on small-scale domestic projects, then the wealth of knowledge you need to be able to do that job is kind of proportionate with the size of your practice already. So I think that those two ends of the spectrum aren't necessarily where we're looking at with what we're doing. But the way that we think everyone sort of inside that bracket can sort of like change, I suppose, is to think more about specialising and collaborating. So we feel that if we go back to the very start, we asked what was the reason I got into architecture. I think those kind of whys about what we're doing, why are you doing this, where did it come from, is quite an important thing to reflect on and come back to in how we run our businesses. Like, what is it we're doing? Why are we interested in this? And then where we got to with that was thinking, what did we make that our business? Just this thing which we really love, which for us is the first engagement with the client and the project through to sort of somewhere just after planning, some sort of early stages of detailed design. So the building is crystallized, conceptually. That for us is just an enormously exciting period, and we just love it. We thrive off that, and we add huge value for our clients. And then we know that there's practices beyond that in the later stages who get equally excited as us in the later stage. And in our experiences of collaborating with those businesses, we just feel like what an amazing outcome this is. We all feel really excited about what we're doing. We're all sharing ideas. We're all kind of building much better buildings as a result. Our clients are delighted with this situation. They've got everyone who's got exactly the right skills in the right places. And the title of architect is shared. It's not one that's owned by one person or one company. And I think that's where we feel the opportunity to overcome these challenges exists for small, medium-sized practices, because there's so much. As we said at the start, there's so much in being an architect from start to finish that, if you to say that's okay, can you cut it up and just have the bit you like? Wouldn't we all just, that sounds amazing. So, we all do that, and then they kind of come together and, you all get excited about our parts. And so I think and then obviously it's much easier we feel it's much easier to run a business when you're operating, regardless of which part of the project you're doing, because you're able to be really more focused in it. And as long as you're open at the same time and collaborative in your outputs, then the team can operate in a much better way. And we're using the part of our brain which we love using, and not the part which feels like it's kind of against the grain a little bit more. And that means that we can work deeper, we could be more productive, we could be happier. And all these things are a way of also actually running a business that's more profitable and operates better. So that for us, it feels like the idea of specializing and collaborating, when you really dig into it, has all these potential benefits that go from the quality of the business, the sustainability commercially, mental health and well-being, and just sort of getting back into loving what we're doing and providing better values and outcomes for our clients, and then actually be able to also engage with all these crises that we talked about with the climate crisis, change of AI and BSA. So that for us, I think, is, since we've done this a couple months ago, we've been kind of exploring the edges of all this. We've really started to feel like what we're doing here with specialising and collaborating can actually address an awful lot of these problems. There's not like a golden or silver bullet to sort of solve everything, but it is a very different way of doing things. It's not, and I say it's very different. It's very different mentally. It feels very different. We're much happier, we're much calmer, we're much better at what we're doing. But we're not actually doing anything fundamentally different to what we all do every day. We're just doing it. And we're just saying we're not going to do this over here, which is quite possible on a random project anyway. It's just that we're sort of openly saying it from the outset, and we're going to collaborate and we're going to work together.
Remember, don't forget to download the Architecture Business Blueprint, the step-by-step formula to freedom for architects, architectural technologists and architectural designers. You can grab the blueprint without any charge at architecturebusinessclub.com/blueprint. And if you're enjoying this episode, then please leave a 5-star review or rating wherever you listen to podcasts. Now back to the show. Yeah, I think this is something that it's refreshing from a point of view of someone within architecture. In truth, it's probably not that unusual in other industries. I know a lot of business experts talk about staying in your zone of genius, or another thing I've heard people talk about is stick to what you do best and delegate the rest. These are the quite common things that you hear some of the gurus talk about. Well, that it's in architecture, we are seemingly expected, or traditionally expected, that we are generalists, that we have to know a little bit about everything. And there's becoming more and more things that we need to know about, to the point where you have to question whether that is sustainable for practice of a certain size to be able to keep on top of everything and to be able to do everything at the best. And chances are that you're not going to enjoy all of it. If you are doing all those different things, like there's going to be a lot of it that you're like, oh, well, this part of the role I really shine at and I feel really fulfilled from doing it. But all this other stuff, like, I'm not enjoying it, but my client expects me to do it.
Yeah. So I completely agree with that. Yeah. And I think there's a part of the issue here is that we haven't changed as a profession. So when you say that, other professions have kind of done this, and it's definitely. And is that we can apply that to all sorts of different aspects of architecture and how we operate as a profession, that we haven't really moved. That you don't have to do anything particularly radical to be doing something completely different, because it's just everyone's operating in broadly the same way. And I don't think we are doing anything particularly different. I think we think this works because we have worked like this before on various projects. But we're just saying that structure works so well, we should continue to do it. So I think that the profession really could do with looking at other industries and seeing how how they've operated. And that's really interesting to what you said about, Gary is saying is that, do what you're good at and focus on your kind of your strengths. I mean, it sounds pretty straightforward stuff. And but I think, it's just there's an inertia that comes with running architecture practices, which I think actually just comes from the fact that it's really hard to do it. It's really hard to actually make an architecture practice sufficiently profitable to exist. And there's not really this, when you operate like that, there's not really the space to change very, very dramatically. So, I think I'd like to think that we can try it. And if it works, we're confident and really excited about it, about this structure. And if it works, then maybe it's one that is a lower risk thing to try for others, because it's you can see if it works enough and then
absolutely. Yeah. I think, one of the things that's it's worth sharing really is just to say, like, if someone's listening to this and they need permission, you feel like they need permission to do this, like, you don't have to run your practice exactly the same as everybody else. And interestingly, what I've seen is that some of the practices that are doing things or operating very differently, there's a few disruptors out there in the industry that are doing things completely different to other traditional ways. And actually, when you look at I've spoken to some of the leaders of these practices, and often they're not. There's a couple that spring to mind in particular that some of the founders are not from architecture. Mm-hmm. They're coming at it from a completely different viewpoint with an absolute fresh pair of eyes, with none of the preconceived ideas about how, this is how a traditional practice should be run. Like, as long as you're pleasing and delighting your clients and you're fulfilling all the legal obligations that are required and you're delivering amazing buildings, like, does it matter if your business is a little bit unconventional?
Yeah. Well, it has to. No, of course not. I know. I think you have to have a USP. Otherwise you're just relying on, I don't know, we're relying on just sort of good luck to some extent, or just being in the right place at the right time. But you think if you, I think what we found, not just with NewWorks, we're at CDA as well, that there's real power in saying no. So if you're really about something, if you've managed to distill down, which is actually I think the hard part, like working out what it is that you really, really, really are kind of passionate about. But if you can get to the point where you figured that out, which is like half the task, then really focusing on that and attacking that space and going for it and getting to your network. Everyone's work comes from the network. Like, get into the network and find out where those opportunities lie, for one thing. And then the other thing, which I honestly I didn't believe until I started to realize that it's true, is saying no to things if it's not if it's not aligned with this unique position that you're taking as a business. If you're doing something slightly different to everyone around you, half of the deal there is saying no to stuff which doesn't fit that particular business plan.
That's hard. Yeah, it's, if your pipeline of inquiries isn't filled and flowing with new inquiries every month, it can be really hard to say no. But if you're saying yes to one opportunity, you're saying no by default. You're saying no to another. And if you say yes to too many clients and projects that aren't an ideal fit, that because of the nature of our industry, a lot of business does come through referrals and past projects. You can end up then, the referrals that start coming in are more of the bad fit clients. And it's like, we've got another inquiry for another one of those projects that we don't want. Why is this happening?
Exactly. And then, but the flip side of that coin is when you start saying no to things, you define yourself in the positives, even though it's a negative communication. The positive aspect of it is you're not just going to say no, go away and walk off. You're obviously going to say, no, I don't want. I'm not doing that work right now because we're really focused on this, whatever this is. And then that creates like a walking advert for your services in that space, because that person then knows what it is that you must be really good at that if that's all you're doing. And then when they're having a conversation with somebody who you don't know, you've never met, and you're not part of that conversation, when they have that conversation with that person, they're like, do you know who's really good for that? Is this architect who's just does that? They must be really good at that. And then it takes time, obviously, to get out. But once it starts coming back, you realize that having said no to certain things means that you really do mean it when you are doing this thing over here. And it can generate that pipeline and those inquiries. And then we know you're in that space. And that really, I think, requires saying no to things as well.
That's so true. Actually, something that you've just touched upon there, that there's actually a real opportunity that when you get an inquiry that is a bad fit, when you decide it's not for you, you say no, that if you're still able to direct them somewhere else or to connect them or introduce them to another practice, that little deed, that good deed that you've done, they remember that. I've actually had instances when I was practicing in architecture that I had inquiries where the people had left me testimonials, like they've left my business reviews, and they weren't even a client, and they've left the review because they're so happy that I introduced them to another architect or another practice, and they remember that. It's incredible, really, when you think about it.
No, absolutely right. And I think everything is ultimately, your network is your kind of your career. And if what you're doing is strengthening that network by making those introductions, say, I can't do it, but I know somebody's perfect for it over here. And the reason I can't do it is because I'm really into this and that. All of these communications are what will ultimately bear fruit, and the goodwill that's being kind of expressed is something that in the end, hopefully will come back. And that's all just, I feel like it's just, if you can be nice to everyone around you, then it kind of, in the end, it kind of pays off.
Absolutely. Tom, let's have a talk then about NewWorks. So you recently launched the practice. Could you give us a little bit of a short run through of some of the differences between TDO and NewWorks? So you've started a new practice, and the way that it works in a day-to-day way is very different to TDO. So could you share some of the things that are different about NewWorks?
Yeah, of course. So the first thing to say is the architecture is largely the same. So what we were great at TDO, we're great at NewWorks. That's our kind of thing. What's different is two things. One is the way that we operate. So it's the business of architecture. How do we go about being architects? That's fundamentally different. And what we're focusing on is this idea of specialising and collaborating. So we are very strong at stages 0 to 3, 3+, and we think there are fantastic delivery partners that we know and we love who are better at later stages. And we think the title of the architect should be shared between us from start to finish. And that means that we can create space to be much more creative by being focused on the bits we're really good at. And we can be better collaborators as a result of working with our delivery partners early on and staying involved later on as well. So that's operationally how it differs fundamentally. That extends to not just delivery, but other collaborators. Like we're kind of getting our heads up here and thinking, well, everyone's got different strengths. We've got different, whether that's in, there's architecture is just a myriad of opportunities and specialisms, and there's an opportunity to collaborate in any project. So that's kind of how we feel we need to operate. On a day-to-day level, that translates to this idea that we need to create space to be creative, or make space to be creative, translates to our sort of daily working rhythm. So we start the day at 10. So we'll have an hour before we start doing something that's not work, just to kind of be present and be happier. And that might be some physical or mental exercise. So it's something that sort of brings us in and it means that when we sit down to start work, we're not kind of panicked and rushed. We're kind of in the right headspace. And then we have 10 till 2, which is our kind of period where we're doing deep work. So we're not having emails on, our phones on. We're just working in that period. And that 4 hours just allows us to kind of sink into the work and really kind of get into it and be productive. And at TDO or any of my previous sort of jobs, I'd have said 4 hours of actual work was a great win for the day. That's an awful lot of consistent amount of work that's coming out on a daily basis. So we feel that if we just make that space and say we're not doing emails because emails are very disruptive and stop you doing what you're doing at any given moment, and there's no warning or forecast as to what that's going to be at any given moment, then we can really get a lot done. And in the second half of the day, we've done our work and we can then be present for everyone else, and our email exchanges and our correspondence and meetings and phone calls and so on can all occur then. So that's how we split the day up, and then we try and finish at 5. And we think that we can condense the day like that. We used to work 9 to 6, now I think 10 to 5. But if we are operating in a very much more focused way where we're deliberate about what we're doing, that we can keep to those hours. And then that space doesn't just create space for creativity, it creates sort of like space for our own well-being and mental health and our families and our lives outside architecture, which I think is often, often suffered as a result of the job we'll do. That's the rhythm that we've implemented and the sort of priorities that we've implemented to practice. And it's been going really well, to be honest. So it's been a really positive change for us. I think we kind of noticed it already.
So there's been some significant noticeable benefits by making these changes.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. I think the job of being an architect comes with an awful lot of anxiety and pressure. And the more unstructured the day is, the more it lends itself to anxiety, I think. Like it's not uncommon, I don't think, to get, it wasn't uncommon for me, and I don't think it's uncommon for many people, to get at the end of the day and think, I've only just started what I sat down to do at 9:00. And it's been a completely chaotic day. And I feel you sort of felt like all the plates are still spinning, but you haven't been not incredibly productive. And probably all the other people in your email chains feel the same. So I think the unfortunate reality is a lot of that has to do with how the construction industry operates. So when buildings are getting built, it can be a bit like that. And that's also why we think there's a particular skill set associated with delivery, that really, really good delivery practices are very, very good at what they do. And they have the systems in place to actually kind of manage that process more effectively and with less anxiety and with more productivity and more profitably. We can operate in the earlier stages as the lead and do that more profitably and effectively with a happier mental state. And we think we can do that, especially if we implement this sort of structure to the day. And it has been, it's just like everything feels calmer, more deliberate, and we're able to talk more creatively about what we're doing. And it's been really positive. Yeah, definitely.
Sounds fantastic. I think the structure to the day, I'm trying to think the name of the essay, was the maker's schedule versus manager's schedule, I think was the famous essay about it, where essentially that they're having that big chunk of time at the beginning of the day, where typically kind of like half a day for creative work, for deep work, for the work that you'd need a big chunk of time to get into it, to get traction.
Yes.
And interruptions can just absolutely kill your attention and concentration on those tasks.
Yes.
Whereas the manager's schedule on the rest of the day is typically like half hour, 1 hour blocks. It's great for meetings, for checking your email, for firefighting, triage type work. But the type of amount of time that you need, it's very different for both, because it's very different type of work. So actually having it, you're setting your stall out saying that this part of the day is just for this type of work and this other part of the day is for all that other stuff, and you're time blocking that out. And I think it's a great idea. It's a really effective way to manage your time better and to be more effective and to retain some sanity at the end of the working week.
Yeah, totally. It's an interesting one. I think when you mentioned before about not an awful lot of this is that different in other industries, and I think that that structure of the working day is probably not that different not necessarily in other industries, but when you go back in time. Like if you go back to the era before emails, when people used to send each other letters, I'd imagine, I don't know, because I wasn't running a practice at that point, but I could imagine you'd have a part of the day where you just did your drawings, and then a part of the day where you sat there and opened your letters and responses. So the emails, like the kind of way that the digital revolution in how we work, it isn't necessarily altogether positive. Like it can have these effects, which actually are kind of perhaps a bit unseen. That we're really available. We're kind of way more available than we probably should be if we're going to be productive. Yeah,
I think that we as business owners, because of that, we have to try and set some boundaries, like you've been doing with NewWorks. Otherwise, like everybody else will just grab your attention at any moment. It's right down to the notifications on your phone and the messages that are coming in from every different way that people can communicate with us now. When I started out in the mid-90s, I worked as a trainee in a local architect's practice, and it was very different then. Like most of the day was spent drawing, and in my case, in the print room, taking lots of copies of drawings when I started out. And it was a certain point of the day when there was some time where most people would be writing letters. If there was some letters that needed to go out, we needed to get it done before 5 to catch the post. So towards the end of the day, people would then get the letters done because they'd been concentrating on doing the project work beforehand. And then that was it. Like, it would get sent out. I think we did have email in the office, and there was like one computer to begin with, and it was just checked like once or twice a day, and it was
printed out.
Yeah, exactly. They were printed out, put in paper files in the filing cabinet, and it was treated very much like, I guess, how it was originally used, like electronic mail. It used to come in and that way, and something's changed over the last couple of decades where the way that people use it's totally different. And you're right, it's not necessarily a good thing. So it's great that you've been setting some good boundaries. So Tom, in the spirit of wrapping things up, what would be the main thing that you'd like everybody to take away from this conversation?
I think everyone's got in architecture. I think everyone got it. Most people you meet, I don't know any architects who've got into architecture without feeling really passionate about it. And I think that for me was a big moment for us. And actually, there's a TV series that Barack Obama's done on Netflix about work, and he was interviewed about it, and he was asked, what advice would you give to young people today going into work, and obviously a really uncertain space as younger people? And his answer, I think, really resonated with me. He said, like, you need to worry less about what you want to be, and more about what you want to do. So about the title, the job title of architect, and more about what you want to do. Like, what is it every day that you really want to do that makes you feel really passionate and happy? And his message is, if you do that, if you focus on what you love and you're really passionate and what you're really passionate about, everything else will fall into place. What you want to achieve with your career will happen, because the people around you, people gravitate to you because you're really passionate about it, you're excited about it, and you're really good at it, and you're a good part of someone else's jigsaw as a consequence. So I think that would be, I think what I'd like to think people can take away is the idea that we're kind of promoting about specialising really is about getting into doing what you're really passionate about. And as architects, we all got into architecture because we're passionate about it on some level. So I think that for me would be the message.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that, Tom. Was there anything else you wanted to add that we haven't already covered in the conversation?
No, I think I would say the one thing I think I'm really keen, and we're really keen, is to communicate is that the architecture is so hard, and architects are I think generally all architects are just do an incredible job in very difficult circumstances, and it's really hard to operate a business in this profession. So I really hope we don't come across as critical of how architects work, on a day-to-day basis. We just feel really passionately that we should all be able to operate in a way that's more sustainable for everyone. And I hope it works, and I hope others can do it as well. But I feel nothing but the deepest respect and admiration for all of our peers.
Thanks, Tom. I'm sure it's going to be really successful. So I wish you and the team at NewWorks every success in the future. Tom, there's one question that I want to ask. It's nothing to do with the main topic, but I love to travel and to discover new places. And I was just wondering if you could tell me about one of your favourite places and what you love about it. So it could be anywhere, like near or far.
Okay. Yeah, deal. I thought you were asking the place. I've done a lot of travelling, honestly I have, but this just sounds like I haven't. But the one place that came straight to mind is this indoor water park called Splashdown and Pool. And it's my kids absolutely like we go there when we drive past, and I went there. It's sort of like a early 90s, quite sort of tired indoor water park, which you wouldn't look twice at, I suppose, if you drove past. But it was just a place of so much happiness for me growing up, and it brings me a lot of happiness. My kids really love it, and so when we go there, we always really enjoy it. So that for me is kind of like a perhaps a bit of an unusual happy place, but it's a really positive place for me. That
That sounds like a lot of fun. My 12-year-old son would absolutely love that. So if we're ever in that part of the world, then we'll definitely go and check it out.
Yeah, check it out in Poole. Mississippi Drifter, best ride.
Mississippi Drifter. I'll make a note of that. Thanks a lot, Tom. Could you please just remind everybody where is the best place to connect with you online?
Yeah, LinkedIn's good. My name's I think I'm the only Tom Lewith about, so it should be easy to find. Or NewWorks, our website, new-works.net. They're both there. I'm really keen to hear from everyone really in the industry who feels like they've got something they're passionate about and a specialism, and we're keen to build that network so we can collaborate more and build teams together. So I'm always really keen to hear from everyone.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure that I put a link to the NewWorks website and your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Okay.
Thank you.
Tom, thank you ever so much.
Thank you, John. Great to be on here, and really appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
Next time, I chat with Ian Anderson Gray about why you should be creating videos and how you can produce them quicker using AI tools. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Architecture Business Club. If you liked this episode, think other people might enjoy it, or just want to show your support for the show, then please leave a glowing 5-star review or rating wherever you listen to podcasts. It would mean so much to me and makes it easier for new listeners to discover the show. And if you haven't already done so, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss another episode. If you want to connect with me, you can do that on most social media platforms. Just search for @Mr. John Clayton. The best place to connect with me online, though, is on LinkedIn. You can find a link to my profile in the show notes. Remember, running your architecture business doesn't have to be hard, and you don't need to do it alone. This is Architecture Business Club.